Hey, AP World, how's it going out there? Are you guys ready for this test tomorrow? You're going to rock it. Drop a comment. Let me know how you did on your DBQ. I'm curious to know that. Don't know if you have the results back yet, but how did you feel about the DBQ? Let me know. Let me know when you get here. Also, tonight we're going to be reviewing Unit 5 for your test tomorrow. So get your notebooks ready. If you have that study guide, you can put some notes on that, or you can just do your own notes however you like. But drop in the comments. Let me know you're here. Hit that thumbs up button. And let me know how you did on your DBQ. Do you think you did all right? What do you think? Was the prompt hard? Did you understand the documents? Those DBQs can be difficult sometimes, but I think that you're going to get it. You are going to get it. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about Unit 5, and that has several different topics in it. I'm going to go super fast because I'm hoping that you've started working on your study guide already, and all you'll need to do is fill in some stuff as we go. So just drop a comment. Let me know who's here. If you have any questions, you can also drop a comment there as well. All right, you did well, but it was a lot. Well, yes. DBQs are a lot, and you guys have to get really fast at writing those DBQs because you only have about 50 minutes to actually write it on the test. So we'll keep practicing those. Hey, how's it going? Welcome, everybody. If you would like to practice DBQs, I'm there every day after school from Monday through Thursday, and we can work on some practice DBQs at that time. Might be able to work in some extra credit for you. I don't know. Depends on your teacher if I can talk them into it. Welcome, everyone. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with Unit 5. Hello. Good to see you guys. I've got a lot of people in here. That's awesome. Hit that thumbs up. It really helps the channel a lot. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. And click that notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. Listen to me. I'm like, so YouTube. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, we're talking about Unit 5. And the first thing that kind of leads into revolutions is Enlightenment. So let's just review that real quick because there's a couple of questions that you're going to have to answer about the Enlightenment. So briefly, what is the Enlightenment? What do you remember about the Enlightenment? Drop it over in the comments. Let me know what you remember about it. Anybody? I'll give you a minute to kind of think about the Enlightenment. Okay. All right, so Enlightenment. We have a lot of Enlightenment thinkers. Basically, during this time frame is the monarchy. Oh, here we go. All right, so we have the Age of Reason. Yep, good. Ideals using the French Revolution. Yes, the Enlightenment definitely influences the revolutions. Hey there, guys. Welcome in. We're just getting started, kind of warming up, talking about the Enlightenment. Very good. So we got philosophers. Yep. Emphasized human achievement. Very good. Question religion. All those are awesome points. Absolutely. They're also starting to question the monarchy. Is the monarchy really the best way to govern? All right. Deism. Oh, dropping those vocab words. I like it. Is it Fatine? I think it's Fatine. Very good. Deism. That's awesome. Yeah. You definitely need to know that word. Fatine, do you know what that means? Can you explain it to them? Go ahead. In the comments, and we'll read it out to them. Okay, Rami says it's a shift from tradition to reason, individualism over community values. Okay, good. So traditional to more of reasoning it out and thinking it out, seeing how we can figure something else out other than just what the typical government was. Very good. Henry says change in economy, like the start of socialism and capitalism, that's going to start. You're right. That kind of does start in the Enlightenment, but it doesn't really take hold until the Industrial Revolution. And we'll talk about why tonight. Very good, Ruth. The belief in a superior being. Deism is a little bit different, though, than just believing in the superior being. They kind of believe that there is a God that created everything, but then he kind of steps back and lets people think scientifically for themselves. Very good, Fatine. Basically, thinking the connection between God and nature. True. And studying science to try to figure things out. Right. So prior to that thinking, prior to the Enlightenment, people are looking mostly towards God for answers and God alone. Now they're starting to think more scientifically. All right, let's talk about the thinkers here. We have John Locke, first of all. John Locke, he believes in social contract. Remember, social contract is where people give up a little bit of their rights in order to gain protection from the government, right? So he is supportive of that. He's also supportive in protection of life, liberty, and property. Remember, Thomas Jefferson takes those words and he changes property to pursuit of happiness, and he gets that from John Locke. So those were the three things that John Locke believes in. Thomas Jefferson just kind of tweaked it a little bit. And then John Locke also believes that citizens should have a say in their government, okay? These are all new ideas at the time because remember, it was monarchy all the way. That was the government, right? All right, let's go to Rousseau. Rousseau believes that men have been corrupted by society. Like they're good in nature, but society has kind of corrupted them. And that he also believes that we should have a social contract with our government, similar to John Locke, and that citizens should be able to have a say in their government. So Rousseau and Locke would have agreed on a lot of things. Social contract, having a say in the government, those are things that they share in common. Voltaire, he believes that there should be a separation between church and state. Remember, at this time, the church was super powerful, and the church in some parts was the government or had a lot of like influence over the government. Voltaire is saying, no, they should be separate. There's no need for them to be together. And he actually believes that giving people this religious tolerance, giving them the freedom to choose their religion, will help with giving them rights. And we'll kind of support that as well. Okay, then we have Montesquieu. Montesquieu is the one that is going to talk about separation of powers within the government. That's where we get our judicial, executive, and legislative. There we go. Judicial, executive, and legislative branches of government from Montesquieu, okay? And the separation of powers, too, means that not one branch will have all the power. Because remember, at the time, the monarchy held all the power. If the king was bad, what are you going to do about it? You can't really do anything about it. And so the separation of power will limit that and not give one single entity or one part of the government all the power. And then we have Mary Wollstonecraft. She is actually a woman philosopher. Of course, she is going to talk about how women need to have more rights and that women are not inferior to men. That's what she will argue. All right. So those are just an overview of some of the thinkers that we talked about during the Enlightenment and an overview of what they believe. This Enlightenment then will lead to revolutions. What's the first revolution? Come on, somebody. I know you remember this one. What's the first revolution that happens that we talked about and kind of affects us even still today? Anybody? Come on, somebody. Drop it in the comments. First revolution. Are we awake out there? Yes, American. Yes, American Revolution. I'm talking about political revolutions. Good job, Henry. Yes, you're right. Neolithic Revolution. That would technically be the first one. I'm talking about political ones, though. I guess I should have clarified. Okay, so we're going to talk about the American Revolution first. First of all, you need to know causes and effects. Also, you should know similarities and differences between all the revolutions because it's a possibility that you might have to answer questions like that. So, as we're talking about them, if you see a similarity or difference, write it out to the side in your notes or mark it similarity difference. If you see a cause or effect, mark it that, okay, so that you can remember when you're reading over these right before the test tomorrow, right? Or when you're studying them later tonight. All right, so American, the cause, of course, high taxes. Everybody knows that. The colonists were really upset about high taxes. They were also upset about this word, mercantilism. Mercantilism basically is where the British were controlling what the Americans could buy. So they basically said, listen, you can only get your manufactured goods from us. Now, what kind of problem is that going to cause? A big problem because there's no competition in prices. So basically, the British can say, you know what? You want this shirt that we manufactured out of your cotton that we got from you? We're going to charge you this amount. And there's no competition, so they can charge however much they want. And the Americans are like, wait a minute, we can get it from the French for cheaper. And the British were like, no, you can't, because you're our colonies, right? So mercantilism is something that really, really upsets them as well. Also, having no voice in government. Remember, the big cry of the American Revolution was no taxation without representation, right? They're asking for representation in Parliament, and the king's like, we don't want you to represent yourselves. Why would we want that? You're our colonists. You cannot represent yourselves in government. All right. So if we're looking at similarities, what I mean by that, Fatine, is look for similarities with the other revolutions. Were there other revolutions that were caused by mercantilism? Were there other revolutions that were caused by taxes? Were there ever other revolutions that were, caused by, what else were we going to say? Like no representation, right? Pretty much all of them, no representation is a big part of it. So that's what I'm meaning. And also, you're right, similarities between them could be that they're all influenced by the Enlightenment. Very good. Okay, so that's American. Now, the other thing that you need to remember about American is that we have some key players. We have Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, all the founding fathers, right? They are going to be wealthy to middle class, maybe definitely not low class. So they would be like up there in the political strata, right? And they are kind of making the decisions. Women don't really gain a lot of rights from the American Revolution, but it does kind of start to spark that fire of feminism in women in America, or what will eventually become America. Okay, so French Revolution. Remember, for the French Revolution, we have the 3 estates. And the first 2 estates barely pay any taxes. They're the high class. And the 3rd estate, they're the ones that are going to pay the taxes. Now, the problem is that the 3rd estate are the majority. In the government, the 3rd estate only gets 1 vote, and the 2nd gets 1 vote, and the 1st get 1 vote. So the 1st and the 2nd always gang up against the 3rd, and they never lower the taxes on the 3rd estate. The 3rd estate gets really upset by this. Remember, they're also upset by the king and queen. They think that the king and queen are spending way too much money. The king's spending money on wars. The queen, of course, on her luxurious hairstyles and big fancy dresses. Y'all remember Marie Antoinette, right? Well, anyway, they are really, really upset about this. Now, the French Revolution, one difference here is that women really get involved with the French Revolution. There's a march on Versailles where they actually march towards Versailles asking for bread, and that was led by women. So if you're talking about differences, that's definitely a difference of the French Revolution. All the other revolutions, women are there and they're present in the revolution, but they're not as active as they were with the French Revolution. So eventually they dispose of the king and queen by chopping their heads off on the guillotine. And then we have the Reign of Terror, which follows, where Robespierre is basically killing everyone that doesn't agree with his government. So remember, for causes of French Revolution, we have the taxes and effects. They get rid of their monarchy, at least for a little while. And a cause of the French Revolution, you could say, would be American Revolution, because that one kind of inspires them. As a matter of fact, remember Lafayette? Lafayette was involved in the American Revolution. He becomes involved later in the French Revolution. And also, Thomas Jefferson is very active as far as influencing him. And so you could definitely say that the American Revolution inspires the French Revolution, or kind of causes it. Okay. All right. Let's see if we got any questions. There is no SAQ. You are not going to have to do any writing. Isn't that awesome? Okay. Is the Reign of Terror still a part of the revolution? So the Reign of Terror is not technically a part of the revolution. The revolution would have been over. It's kind of like the ending of the revolution. But you could probably put it in there with it. They call it the Reign of Terror, I think, as kind of like a separation mark of, when the king and queen are killed. And at that point, the new government steps up. But eventually, Robespierre goes crazy, and then he gets his head chopped off as well, and Napoleon comes into the scene. Okay. So Reign of Terror would be after the Revolution. Okay. But you could say that the Reign of Terror is an effect of the French Revolution because it wouldn't have happened without the French Revolution, right? Okay, let's go on to the Haitian Revolution. So the Haitian Revolution is mostly brought about by the lower class. Yes, Luz, Reign of Terror, effect. Absolutely. Okay, Haitian Revolution, moving on to that one, mostly brought on by the lower class. It's the first successful slave rebellion. And this one is led by Toussaint. This is how you spell his name. Let me make sure I get it right here. And this one is inspired by the Enlightenment, the American Revolution, as well as the French Revolution. Because remember, Haiti is a French colony. So when the French get their freedom, the Haitians are kind of like, what? Why are we still a colony? We want to be free as well. And remember, there were several different racial demographics. There were the Grand Blancs and the Petit Blancs, and then the free men and the slaves. So there were several different demographic or different social classes that are all kind of wanting their freedom. Now, this one, though, is when it is won by the slaves. So it's one of those where the lower class rises up and becomes the government, whereas most of the revolutions will, whoever kind of starts it and leads it will become the government. Here, that's a different story. The slaves become free and they are put in a place of power. All right. Also about this one, remember, it's very bloody and it's very scary to the white people who own slaves because they're worried that their slaves will revolt as an effect of this. So one effect of the Haitian Revolution is that the white slave owners all around the world are trying to keep this kind of a secret. They don't want their slaves to know about it because they're afraid that their slaves will revolt as well. Another effect is that when Napoleon loses, he decides to sell Louisiana to the United States. So we get the Louisiana Purchase out of Napoleon getting defeated by Haiti because he needs the money. The questions on the test, I think there's 25. And let's see, Fatine says it was mainly the slave independent movement. That's true, but it didn't start out that way because the Grand Blancs and the Petit Blancs also wanted more rights, and they wanted say in government as well. And so it's kind of an interesting thing that happens is that eventually all of the classes kind of like rise up. Most of the Grand Blancs will end up leaving the island, and the slaves get to take over and take more power. It does inspire more slave revolts, Luz, absolutely. But like I said, the people who own slaves try to keep it quiet. Like the slave owners in the United States, they try to not let the slaves hear about it because they're scared that the effect will be more slave revolts. There are some that are inspired by it, though. This one, however, is the largest and the most successful at that time. Okay, let's go on to Latin America. So Latin America is a series of revolutions, right? Kind of like all together. And why are they upset? Well, remember, Latin America is also a very diverse mixture of people. We have the Creoles, and we have the Mestizos. Creoles, remember, are Europeans who are half European, half African. And then Mestizos are half European, half Native American, and or indigenous to that area. And so they both want power. They both want say in government. And at the time, the Spanish king is overseeing these colonies. And of course, he doesn't want to give up any power or any say. And at this time, Spain is also practicing mercantilism against the Latin American colonies, just like the British did to the American colonies. All right, so mercantilism could be a similarity between the two because it's happening in Latin America too. And the wealthy Creoles don't like this at all because they cannot make as much money from the Spanish mercantilism. Once again, in mercantilism, there's no competition. So the prices are set by Spain, basically. They get to say whatever price they want, and the colonists are forced to pay those prices. Okay, no competition. Okay, so in these both of these groups are fighting for more political freedom. It starts with the Creoles. The Creoles are kind of the upper class, and they have a little bit more power than mestizos. And at first, they kind of want to do it all on their own. Their leader is Simón Bolívar. Remember Simón Bolívar? Here's how you spell his last name. He is a Creole himself, and he does a lot of writing to be able to get support for the revolution. And he is also someone that's very active in motivating the people to join the revolution. So long-term effect of the Latin American Revolution is that they get independence in Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador as well. Okay. All right. So let's move on from political revolutions to talk about the Industrial Revolution, because this is also a big part of Unit 5. So we have all of these colonies, right? We have these huge empires, maritime empires that are getting raw materials, and they need to be able to manufacture these raw materials. So that's where the Industrial Revolution comes in. Now, it starts in Britain. There are several reasons why it starts in Britain. The first is that they have a lot of iron and coal. So access to those minerals and those resources will really, really help them get going in the Industrial Revolution. They also have access to a lot of rivers and canals. So that helps them transport manufactured goods once they're manufactured and get them to market faster and more economical. Also, their investors are available. They have money, they have capital, and they're willing to invest because there are people that want the manufactured goods. So remember, this concept is important: supply and demand. You can have all of the supply of manufactured goods that you want, but if you don't have people to buy them, what good is the supply, right? And then if you have a high demand and not enough supply, that's a problem too. And so because they have a demand, now they need the supply. They need to be able to get these manufactured goods done quicker and more economically, right? Cheaper. So the investors, one other key thing about the investors is that they're also involved in the government. So they start to pass laws that will support manufacturing and support businesses like that. Could also be because of mercantilism. You mean like the Industrial Revolution starting? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, I mean, mercantilism is definitely a big part of it because, once again, they have the demand, right? They have colonies that want these goods. But by the time the Industrial Revolution really gets going, America has already gained their freedom. And they're not, I mean, really, the British are not going to have that mercantilistic relationship with the American colonies like they used to. However, because the British start industrializing first, they're going to have the upper hand. And that's going to be the reason that it's going to eventually spread to the rest of Europe, because the rest of Europe wants to be able to be competitive with Britain. They don't want Britain to make all the money off these manufactured goods, right? So just because America wasn't a colony anymore doesn't mean that America is not wanting to buy these manufactured goods. Because remember, America will industrialize a lot later than Britain does. Okay? Eventually, they will industrialize as well, but it takes a little bit longer. Okay, so then we have the before Industrial Revolution. Before Industrial Revolution is the cottage industry. So make sure that you know the difference between the two. Cottage industry versus factory. There are some key things that you need to know with each one of these. Of course, cottage industry is done in the home, and it is more expensive. The reason it's more expensive is because it takes a longer time to produce things by hand, right? It's also higher quality most of the time. The reason that it's higher quality is because people are actually taking their time to do it. It's not a machine producing it, it's an actual person. All right, so it's going to be higher quality, therefore it's going to be more expensive. Now, the downfall is that there's no interchangeable parts. So, for example, if I were manufacturing this pen and let's say that this part broke, I have to throw away the whole pen because in cottage industry, there's no way I can make another one of these pieces because I don't have a mold for it. I don't have a way to do it. It's not interchangeable. But in the factories, we eventually will get interchangeable parts, which means that every part that looks like this is made the exact same way, so it will fit any pen. So now if it breaks, I can just buy an extra one of those parts and fix the pen. Okay. Now, it wouldn't have been pens at that time. It would have been other things like machinery and whatnot. But it makes machines a lot more economical because now if you have a machine and a part breaks, you can get that part rather easy and you don't have to throw away the whole machine. All right. So with cottage industry, the things you need to remember is it's made at home, it's higher quality, usually more expensive, no interchangeable parts. It's also slower production, so there's not as much output with cottage industry at the same rate as there is with factory. Okay? Okay. And then for factory, it's pretty much the opposite. You have faster production, you have cheaper goods, interchangeable parts, but you also have the downfall that most of the time it's lower quality products because it's being put out faster and it's being done by a machine, so there's not as much attention to detail. All right? Okay, so the role of women in the cottage industry. So it's different in the cottage industry than it is in the factory. Some of you had the DBQ that talked about the effects of social change. And there was a document in there that talked about women losing their jobs because if they were staying in the rural communities where they used to do spinning in their home, which was a cottage industry, they couldn't do it anymore because the factories were taking their work. Remember that document? Well, that is pretty much how their role is going to change. Women in the cottage industry here, they used to produce things. They used to be able to stay at home. They used to make their own schedule and be able to stay with the children and, not work on the grueling schedule of a factory. But for those who urbanize and move off of the farms and begin to work in the factories, their life is going to change drastically because now they're going to be working those long hours. They're going to be working the machines. Sometimes it's very dangerous. Remember, they wear dresses at that time, and so their dresses could get caught in the machinery and they could get pulled in. All right, so it's a lot different working in the factories versus the cottage industry. Also, remember, we have a lot of pollution in the city because of urbanization and because of all the factories and letting off smoke and whatnot. And so their health is going to decline. It's a lot different in the city versus in the rural countryside where there's fresh air, right? So that document was talking about women who stayed in the countryside and were continue doing or trying to do the cottage industries, but they had competition from the factories, and so they couldn't continue doing that anymore. And if they did continue it, they weren't making very much money because it's cheaper to get it from the factory. Okay, that was the whole point of that document. Yes, Fatine, that's right. It was the first document. And Henry says, could we compare the monopolies to mercantilism? You could, if that was your prompt. Yes, absolutely. You'd have to be very specific about what monopolies you're talking about, and it would definitely have to go with your topic, but you could probably pull that one off. Okay. I like the little unicorn there, Hashem. Thank you so much. How are you doing? You good? I think you might be somebody that I had in the past, last year, right? Is that who that is? Anyway, let's get going on. You just can't get enough world history. I love it. Okay. I talked a lot tonight. Anyway, so do we understand the difference then, and the effect on women, the difference between being in the cottage versus the factory? Obviously, cottage industry was way better for their health, for their families, being able to stay home. Now, remember, this is the low-class women. We're not talking about middle-class or high-class women. Middle-class, high-class women, they're pretty much staying at home still. If their husbands make enough money to where they can stay at home, then that's considered a status symbol to have a stay-at-home wife. All right? Okay. So the next part talks about effects on children. Children definitely have a lot that they endured during the Industrial Revolution. Very poor treatment, very dangerous working conditions. Now, they were working some on the farms before urbanization, right? But they were not working as young as what they will work in the factories. And it's not as strenuous. It's not as long hours as what they're going to have to work in the factories. You had some documents that talked about their low pay and their unhealthy appearance because they're not getting exercise and fresh air. They're also not getting education. Now, a little bit later, there will be some more opportunities for education. Some charities will rise up. They will have some reforms. They will pass some child labor laws that will protect children a little bit more. But in the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the child labor was horrendous. It was really, really bad. Okay, so Fatine says, middle class basically created in the 19th century. Yes, around the 1800s is when the middle class starts to rise up. And then we have Henry say, quick question, when we talk about effects in general, would we talk about long-term effects or short-term effects? Well, it depends on what your prompt is asking. You never want to do anything in general, okay? You always want to be specific. I tell my students, you have to BS, okay? Don't take your minds there. I'm not talking about that kind of BS. I'm talking about be specific. That's what you got to do. So remember to always be specific. So if it asks for long-term effects, great. If it asks for short terms, that's what you need to do. If it asks for just effects, then you have a choice. But you need to make sure that you give plenty of details. The problem that my students have with their essays is the specifics, right? The details. And the only way you're going to learn the details is if you study, right? You need to at least be studying probably about 3 hours a week with AP World. And most of you probably don't do that. So let's pick up the pace, guys. Come on. We're 100 days away from the test. Actually, a little bit less than that now. Ruth says, wouldn't we be asked for both? It depends. Most of the time, the essay question is not going to clarify whether it's long-term or short-term effects. It's just going to say effects. So you just have to make sure that you explain it really well, right? Now, there are a lot of changes that are going on in the Industrial Revolution too. So like what we were just talking about with children, they're at first treated very poorly, and then it changes through reforms, right? So if you're asked about what are the effects on children in society, you can talk about they're poorly treated, and then you can go into how it changes if the question asks for that, or if you want to add that in, okay? So you just have to be very careful that you're answering whatever the prompt tells you to answer. Okay, now I want you to also remember that the laboring class is 70% of the population, and they are going to suffer most during the Industrial Revolution. Remember, middle class and high class, they're living a pretty posh life during this time, all right? And the laboring class are the ones that are going to be moving from the countryside and urbanizing. Remember, one of the reasons that happens is because of the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution is where you see the seed drill and the steam engine and all of these things that are making agriculture faster and more efficient. Now they don't need as many workers. So the workers start to move to the city. Also, we see the enclosure movement. Remember, the enclosure movement is when the bigger farms are kind of buying up the smaller farms so that they can have more land and therefore more profit. And so the people who are selling their farms are moving into the city and urbanizing. So if you were asked about causes of industrial revolution, those would be two causes. Okay, and then just to wrap up effects, long working hours, low wages, child labor, monotonous work. It's very boring. Farm work, not as boring, right? Because it kind of changes on a daily basis. You might, go and feed the animals and then check on the crops, and there's different things. With factory work, you're doing the same thing over and over and over, especially once assembly line comes out. That's going to be a little bit later, but an assembly line is basically like the part passes you and you do one thing to the part and you pass it on. You do the same thing for 8-10 hours a day. I mean, it's just monotonous, mind-numbing work. People were not used to that. Also, you have direct supervision from a boss. When you're a farmer, you don't have that, right? You're kind of your own boss. Another thing that you could put down that affects women is that the young unmarried women will mostly work in textile factories. Sometimes they are not treated really well by their supervisors, so that becomes a problem as well. Okay, and then how does it affect the environment? Well, the environment definitely changes. There's lots of pollution in the rivers. That's going to cause disease to spread, as well as the crowded cities will cause disease to spread as well. Okay, and then we have capitalism versus socialism. Remember, capitalism is basically where the government stays out of things and lets the economy run itself. Socialism is the opposite of that. Socialism is where the government has control in the economy. So we have two different people that are like coming up with these ideas and talking about these ideas. The first one is Adam Smith, where he wrote in The Wealth of Nations about capitalism. He uses this term laissez-faire, and let me see if I can spell it. Laissez-faire, I think, is something like this. I don't know. Spell check that for me, because I did not write it down. Something, oh, there we go. Something like that. Laissez-faire basically means free of government, like freed from government control. And he uses it in that way. There we go. It's a Z. Thank you. You guys are awesome. So laissez-faire is what Adam Smith is saying that the government should be. Basically, government stays out of the economy and just lets it run by itself. Okay. Now, socialism is the opposite. Socialism is Karl Marx's brainchild, and he says that basically government should be involved and everyone should be equal. Everyone should have enough. There shouldn't be someone that's super, super rich and someone that's super, super poor. And laborers should have a say in what happens to the capital. And so basically socialism kind of takes a start because of the bad treatment of laborers. And therefore the laborers kind of come together and they're like, hey, maybe it is a good idea that we have a say in this. Okay. Yeah, basically, Fatine, it's the difference between a competitive economy, which would be capitalism, and not so much in socialism, because socialism is more equal. Eventually, there's also going to be the communist idea where everyone is truly equal, right? That's at least what it's supposed to be, a utopian type society. And that was what Karl Marx was kind of pushing for. He was hoping that the workers would rise up and revolt against this system. And that doesn't really happen in Great Britain, but that's what he was hoping for to happen. Okay, so this is a big concept. How is industrialization different and similar depending on location? Because it definitely takes shape differently in different places of the world. Industrial revolution kind of prompts mass migration. Remember, it prompts like the moving around of people and some changes in where people are living. Remember, if you watched my Industrial Revolution video, you learned that in 1800 there were less than 1% of the total population of the world was Europeans. But by 1930, it had risen to 11%. So we see this like big movement of people going around the world and migrating. So we definitely have some differences. One difference is that immigrants were going to Latin America, but they were also coming to North America, and their experience was completely different. Okay, and we're going to talk about that. Basically, in North America, the land was more affordable and there were more industrial jobs. The newcomers were kind of seen as un-American, and they were blamed for crime. So it's kind of interesting because at that time, there were a lot of immigrants in America. I mean, all the colonists were basically immigrants, but they weren't really considering themselves as that because now they're like several generations away from being an actual colonist, right? And they've gotten their freedom through the revolution. And so now they're looking at these newcomers coming in like, oh, they're un-American and they shouldn't be here. Also, immigrants coming into America contributes to Western expansion. They're going to work on the railroads and start help building the railroad to expand to the West. Henry says, what's the difference between the early stages of socialism and communism? That one is kind of tricky. Basically, communism would be more state ownership, more state control, whereas socialism is just kind of some. So think of socialism as like right in between communist and capitalism, kind of. And yeah, like Twan says, communism, the poor class is basically rising up and saying, we're not going to be poor anymore. And we'll get into more communism when we talk about Russia here in a couple weeks with World War I. Okay, what caused socialism? That would be when the workers were not getting treated well. Socialism kind of takes hold. Okay, so let's get back to this. Another thing that you need to know is the Industrial Revolution is going to eventually spread, as I told you before, to US, Russia, Japan, Latin America, all over, right? So here's how it goes in the US. The U.S. has textile factories that start in New England. So the textile factories make cloth, right? Textiles. Eventually, railroad companies will receive grants from the government, and large companies will also receive tax breaks. So we have mass production beginning. And we see mass production, especially with Henry Ford. Henry Ford makes the Model T, and it's the first affordable car for people, you know, to be able to buy. So that's kind of a cool thing. He also comes up with the assembly line, which is what I was telling you about before. And we also see the Sears Roebuck catalog. If you watch my Industrial Revolution video, you'll see an example of that. It's kind of cool. It's like this huge catalog of all these products that you can mail order. And it's super cheap at the time, but you have to remember that people don't make a lot at the time. So money has a little bit different value. All right. So that's kind of how it goes in the U.S. And women start to work as the lower class women will go to work in the factories, just like what happens in Britain. Now, in Russia, remember, we still have an absolute monarchy. The Tsar is still in charge. There's no national parliament. There's no legal political parties, and there's no nationwide elections. The Tsar pretty much rules unchecked. And serfdom will not become illegal until 1861. So there's a vast cultural and social gap between the two classes in Russia. In the U.S., though, Industrial Revolution is going to come mostly through farmers, workers, and businessmen, whereas in Russia, it kind of comes when the serfs start to get free. I'm about to sneeze. I'm so sorry. Okay. I don't know. It must be this chalk dust about to make me sneeze. So Russia it comes through the state first, and then once the serfs are freed, it's going to move forward even more. By 1900, Russia is the fourth in the world for production of steel, and it has these major industries of coal and textile and oil. Middle class will rise up at that time in Russia, and many are going to start to object to the Tsar because he's very conservative, and they don't like that about him. Also, 5% of the population are going to be factory workers, and they become a little bit more radical. So this is where we see kind of the roots of the communist movement kind of start and take place. And a small group will actually be educated on Karl Marx's ideals, and that kind of starts that ball rolling towards a revolution which will eventually overthrow the Tsar near the end of World War I. So we'll get to that later, okay? So let's switch gears real quick and talk about Latin America. Conditions there after they receive independence are not very good. There's low population, there's flooding of the silver mines, abandoned farms, empty national treasuries, regional revolts. There's all kinds of like separation and international wars that are breaking out as well. So there's just a ton of political instability. I don't know why that keeps going fuzzy. Sorry about that. And in the 1800s, they're kind of starting to get some more stability, and they're pushing towards industrialization. But the thing that's different about Latin America is that they don't really have a middle class that is wanting to buy these goods. So there's no demand for the supply, right? There's really no incentive for the rich people to invest their capital in making factories because there's nobody to buy the manufactured goods. And so they kind of stick more with exporting. And, for example, Mexico has silver, Chile has copper, Bolivia has tin, and they're making profit off of that. They also make a lot of profit off of building railroads to get these items to market. So the lower class in Latin America is going to stay very rural and very impoverished at this time. Many will become dependent laborers. Eventually, the governments kind of push the farmers off their land because they're so in debt. And so then that's at the time when they kind of are dependent on the wealthy to even have a livelihood. The Mexican Revolution takes place in 1917. That's when the workers overthrow the dictator, and they get a new constitution at that time. It does give some rights to the workers. They get universal suffrage for males, and there's kind of a redistribution of land. But remember that the big difference is that the Industrial Revolution never really happens in Latin America. There's not a lot of reason to build factories. And so they do build some, but not the way they do in other parts of the world. The social structure, like I said, many are too poor to buy the manufactured goods. So where there's no demand, there's no need for a supply, right? And so the wealthy just continue to benefit off of exporting, and the poor stay poor. And the economic growth, basically, if there is any, it's going to come from investments of Europe. All right, so now let's go to Japan, the Meiji Restoration. Remember, this is basically forced by the West. Japan had been very isolated from the rest of the world. Now the rest of the world wants to come and trade with them, and they're basically forced to westernize, and they get rid of traditional ideals like the samurai and the Bushido code. That all goes by the wayside, and they start to build schools, which will increase literacy. They rapidly industrialize with their economy and with factories, and they start to get some of the democratic ideas such as free press and labor unions and more respect for personal liberties. Okay, and then we also talked about in the Ottoman Empire how they kind of are very far behind in Industrial Revolution as well. So that's a little overview about what's going on in the world at this time. Remember, it starts in Great Britain and then kind of moves throughout. So let's look and see if there's some more questions. Lou says, didn't Russia have the Trans-Siberian Railroad? Yes, that will get built during this time frame as well. And maybe mainly agricultural and peasant-based. I'm not sure what you mean by that. You mean that the peasants are the ones that are building the railroad? Mostly it would have been the free serfs that are going towards Siberia to try to get away from their old life once they're free. And did they get rid of their traditional ideas? If you're talking about Japan, yes, at the time they did. They did urbanize, and I'm talking about like traditional ideas as far as like the samurai. Now, some of the samurai will go into political positions within the government, so they're not like going away completely, but they're also not, they're not really in charge anymore. So that's what I meant by that. Causes of urbanization. Yes, so causes of urbanization, you need to look up agricultural revolution as well as the enclosure movement. Both of those are key causes of urbanization. I'm also going to post this video so you could rewind it. The other two videos that you could check out is the one on Enlightenment and Revolutions. That's going to go over those a little bit more in depth than what I did tonight, as well as the industrialization video. That one will go a little bit more in depth as well. Okay, and then did China have the strengthening movement? Not sure what you're talking about by a strengthening movement. They do industrialize, though, and the reason that they do is because of the Opium Wars, and we're going to be talking about that in the next unit, but I do talk about it a little bit in the industrialization video, and basically that's where Britain wants to go in and sell the Chinese opium, and the Chinese, they don't want it. The Chinese people do, but the Chinese government's like, no, it's messing our people up, because opium basically makes them high and lethargic and not really care about, working for the government, right? Making any money. And so there are a couple wars fought over that. The British win both of them and force their way into China. So because that happens is one of the reasons that the Japanese don't really fight the Western influence, because they saw what happened in China and they let the Western people come in. Thought Opium Wars and the split weaken China instead of industrializing them. It does weaken them, but it will like usher in industrialization. Like it's kind of the start of it, because they have to let the West in now. Before that, they were very isolated, right? So it's going to weaken them, but in the long run, it will kind of push that Westernization into China. Okay, so you repeat the Europe and U.S. industrialization reason? Not sure what you're talking about there. You might just have to rewind it, because I'm not really sure what you were asking. And then also, did China industrialize later? Yes, so it's going to be a lot slower process. We'll get into that when we talk about China with the Opium Wars and stuff. You don't need to worry about that for this unit test right now. Okay, so if you have any other quick questions, let me know. I'm about to hop off of here. Thank you so much for listening. Just remember, when you're looking at the documents tomorrow, really make sure that you analyze those documents and you read the question first. If you read the question first, then you know what you're looking for within the document, right? So read the question first, read all your answer choices, then read the document, and cut out the first two answer choices that you know for sure are not right. Get rid of those right away, and then you only have two, and then it's like more of a 50-50 thing. Then look at those two, see which one kind of connects to the document. Some of the questions aren't going to be directly in the document, but if you know this background knowledge, you should be able to answer those questions, because you can put that background knowledge with whatever you read in the document and analyze it and put it together, okay? Nationalism definitely is going to come into play more in the next unit, absolutely. But it kind of comes into play a little bit in this unit as well, because remember, Europe is starting to kind of feel this very nationalistic feeling. Remember, nationalism is like this loyalty to your culture and the people that speak the same language. And so it's kind of starting, but it's definitely going to come into play when we start talking about imperialism and World War I. Here's the thing, Fatine. The units are really weird this year because there was a rewrite with the curriculum, and the new AMSCO book kind of throws stuff in weird combinations based on like these big ideas, right? So, for example, it kind of talked about the Opium Wars a little bit, but it's going to get into them more in another unit. And so what's interesting about the AMSCO book that I found is it'll talk about the same thing in like 2 or 3 different units. So it's kind of confusing a little bit. So just really pay attention to the dates in which everything is happening, because just because it's talking about it in Unit 5 doesn't mean it won't appear again later in Unit 4. It's a little bit confusing in that way, but just pay attention to those dates. And I mean, the start of nationalism is going to start through revolutions a little bit as well, because people are going to, especially when America wins, they're going to be the first ones to ever beat a big monarchy, right? To ever beat a colonial power. And so these ideas kind of start to spring up. But nationalism really takes hold during imperialism and during World War I. All right, and we'll get into that more later. So don't really like sweat about that right now, because we'll be getting into that a lot later too. Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank you so much for joining me. I super appreciate you listening and giving me those watch minutes. I'm super close to being able to start monetizing, so I'm excited about that, but still need those watch minutes. So, keep watching those videos, press play, and let them go. Maybe you'll get some knowledge, and definitely 100% study. I can't stress it enough. You guys cannot get this stuff by just hearing it one time in class. It's just not going to stick. If you need help with study skills, please come after school, Monday through Thursday. I'm there to help you. I will help you make flashcards. Whatever works for you, we will figure it out. I'll even study with you because I'm a total dork about this stuff. Also, one last thing, on Tuesdays after school, we're starting to do junk journaling. So if you're interested in learning about how to do that, join us after school on Tuesday. It's super fun. I'm so addicted. I'm just totally in love with it. Absolutely so much fun. Stop by, though, and see me tomorrow, because there's a short scavenger hunt that you need to do in order to prepare for Tuesday after school if you want to come and junk journal with us. That goes from 3:15 to 4:15. All right. Thank you so much. You guys have an awesome night. I'm so glad that's helped you, Henry. And thank you for your thanks and your appreciation. Totally love you guys. I know you're going to rock this test. All right. So do a good job. Make sure you really think about what you're answering. And I'm so proud of you for hanging in there. We're almost there, guys. We're almost to spring break. And after spring break, it's all downhill from there. So keep working hard. Proud of you guys. I'll see you at school tomorrow. Have a good one.